Hi, this is Patrick. In this video I'm going to show you how to create the web accessibility resource page. So the first part about this assignment is really kind of investigating and researching the topic of web accessibility, and then once you have your content, you're ready to create your page. Be sure to look at the rubric to understand any specifics you need to know, but for this I'm going to open Dreamweaver, and just like the other pages or assignments, some of the basics are still there, right? It's using a container. It's going to use some HTML5 tags, but we're adding in with each one of these assignments a little different elements to help just kind of further help you develop your skills and abilities with Dreamweaver, HTML, and CSS. So I'm going to do File, New. And as these videos go on, I'm going to start hand coding a little more and just going to be a little faster. I'm going to name this accessibility.html, and I'm going to save it in my 502 folder. I'm going to change it to design view, and I'm going to go down and add a document title. I'm going to now go up to my HTML tag, and I'm going to type lang equal in. So this is just something that you'll notice the validation often recommends. So now that I'm going to save this, and I can notice that I'm set up here. Got my document title, I'm in design mode, and I can double check over here that it's correctly in my 502 folder on my local view. So now I'm ready to go. I'm going to hand code the basic setup that we've talked about and used in the past. So this is div id container. Then I'm going to add a header. Section, footer. So one of the things you'll notice with this example is it actually has the text at the very bottom, or the copyright, outside of the container. So in this case, you can notice the footer is actually outside of the container. So I'm going to just copy that and put it outside, and I'm going to apply some formatting so you can see it's a little different. So in the past we've had the footer within the div, so this is showing you a way to have it outside of it. And so this just, if anything, makes it a little more subtle that your footer sits at the very bottom like that. So I'm just going to say web accessibility resources. And I'm going to basically add my text for links right now. And I'll talk about this just in a second. Okay, and then let's just add a little bit of starter text to get us going. I'm going to hit undo. I typed too fast. So if I'm not sure where I'm at, sometimes I'll look over at code view. And so I'm just going to grab this text just to speed some things up. So I'm assuming you would have your text from your research as well. And double check that it has a paragraph tag. It does. Typically with web content you won't find the old idea of indenting a paragraph, but spacing and still having paragraphs helps people. So alright, so what I know with this is my H1, this is my H2. The big thing with accessibility is that, one, headings are very helpful. Two, you don't want to go from an H1 to say an H3. So you want to go in order. So I'm just going to highlight this and going to start over, make sure I have HTML selected, and go H1. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to do this for my H2. Okay. And down here I will put the basics for So this is something here. In this example, we have this kind of author text up here, it's something that you could always do in the footer instead. So it could be, Patrick Lowenthal, and maybe something like that. Let's just do a file save. And then I have a couple of these links. I'm going to just copy that. I'm going to go down to Property Inspector, and I'm going to make sure my target is in a new window. I'm going to do blank. And basically the idea, conventional wisdom, is that if it's an external link or a PDF or anything that's pushing you away, it's going to be in a new window, or with the HTML language, you use blank target. Now, there are some kind of different schools of thought that specifically with mobile and for accessibility, pushing people to another page or outside of it is having an external link rather than an internal, and using that target blank is problematic. But generally, most people agree that it's the better way to go. I'm going to save all. And at this point, I could preview it down here in a browser, or I could just go to live view to kind of get a feel. But it's really not that exciting right now because it's just some basic content. But up here we have these, and it's easier, these links, it's easier to see it here if I make it smaller. It allows me to jump within the page. Now, these aren't that helpful for short pages. In fact, depending on your browser, you might find that it doesn't even seem like it's working at times because your page isn't. Let's see if maybe if I try it this way, I can illustrate my point. Yeah, so I clicked that, nothing happened because the page, everything's already viewable on one page. But it's something that when you go view, actual size, or if I bring this up and I make it big, then I can start seeing that it's working the way I want. And so the way that these work is it's a link, but it's, basically an internal link that is jumping. Let's go up here and let's find where we are. So right here, you can see that it's basically the link is this hashtag or pound evaluation. And so if I go down, I could see down here it's because I have an ID equals evaluation. So that's how that's working. So let's get back here, and I lost my view page source. So let's bring that back. And so I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to add the rest of this content, and then we will start working on finishing these links and then adding some styles. So now that I have my basic text, I'm going to continue on and add my additional headings. And then I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to add the URLs. Okay, so I have those all in, so I'm going to save. Now, one of the important things too is to check all your links that they work. So when I later upload this, I want to double check. So in this case, I haven't even double checked that these old links still work, but I'm assuming they do, but that's probably a really bad idea. The other thing to kind of think about is I could, rather than have the URL right here, I could use this as a heading, as an H3, have the description and link under it. And so one of the nice things some people like about actually having the URL visible to someone is they can understand if there's an error or something, they can see where it's going. Sometimes with Google Docs or long web pages, that doesn't work well. It always works better with shorter things. But nonetheless, it's something that some people find helpful. But the other thing is really to have a description of the link. And so while resources are helpful, it's more that people understand, well, why should I click on this versus this? Because sometimes your users or learners aren't going to just go through and explore everything, especially if they don't have to. And so it's how do you draw their attention or help them see that it's relevant. So as I mentioned before, we're going to add this internal link. And so if I go to like web accessibility, if I look for that heading, and sometimes if I'm not sure, I will do a Control F, or a Command F and search for what I want. So, in this case, what is, and so I can see that actually there's nothing there because it's so high. But if I go down to the next one, I can see that I have an ID evaluation. So if I go down here, and if I make sure that's selected, this is where I think, I never use this way, but let's see if it allows me to do it that way. It does. So down here, we're just gonna make sure that's selected, and we're gonna say tips. And the other one, I think I did color, so you get the basic idea. But basically, this is going to allow me to then go up here, and these links, this is where I can go down here, and this first one I did evaluation. I should be able to do evaluation. I called this one tips, where this other example, I think I called it tip, but that's little details like that. Let's say it's not working, it's going to be a problem. You can also, I believe, I was trying to remember. I thought there was a way to point to it, but maybe I'm crazy. So this last one, we're going to say color. And we can see that it actually did that at the, oh no, it did it right. So let's save all and let's just take a peek. Okay, so let's make the browser a little smaller. All right, that's jumping correct, that's jumping correct. All right, so all three appear to be working. And if you're really not sure if it's, you can even go even smaller, and you'd be like, all right, that goes to accessibility, that goes to tip and tools, that goes to color. So that's working right. So there's another thing that we have here, and this is, you'd find this more in the old days than nowadays, but back to the top. So there's some different beliefs on web accessibility. Some people believe old school idea was you don't want pages too long, too much scrolling was bad. Then more accessibility, kind of even what you'll find now is it's not necessarily, and I think it's partly because of mobile influence, but that a long page isn't necessarily bad. You just need to, some people talk about scent. You need to have reason, and where learners or users know to keep scrolling down the page. There's a scent, there's something that they're following. But you still will find sometimes people use these internal links back to the top. And so this, if I go down here, it's basically looking for top, right? And so if I go to up here, I can see where is that top. So I'm going to just search, and I can see that it's on the H1 at the web accessibility. So it's actually right here. So if I click here, and I go top, then I go down here. And so I'm basically doing the same thing, just opposite. So let's save all and let's preview it. Okay, so I did something wrong, and sometimes if I'm typing too fast, I can do that. So you can see that I forgot the pound sign, right? So if I add that, let's do a save. Let's try it once more. Okay, so if I'm down here, and this is where making the page smaller can help. Okay, brought me right back. So basically now I have my page set up. I have all my content. I could do, one other thing, because one of the big things about accessibility is when it comes to images and alt text. And we've talked about this some, but maybe I want to add an image to my page. In fact, I would say every page, you should think about this. So Google Images, there's lots of places to look for images. You really want to always think about copyright. And so one of the things you can do is look for usage rights. And when you start looking, this means things that have been labeled to be reused. And it's hard because sometimes the image you want, you're like, I can't find it. And so in this case, Creative Commons is usually always the safest way to go. And I thought there was, let's just say WebAIM. And then I go down here, and I can even see these little gray and white boxes, which suggest that it's transparent. So that is going to play better with, oops, gave me an error. Let's just see if we can do a save image as. And I don't remember, I do have an images folder, so I want to make sure I save it in the right place. And so I'm going to go down here and going to say web aim. And so always ask yourself for anything, could you add images? So when you think of CARP and you think of repetition, you can sometimes run into problems with using images from too many places. I'll later talk about ways that you can use CSS and kind of, put a div around it in a border and make things feel like they might come from the same place. But for this example, I'm just wanting to give you a basic idea of how to add an image and add that alt text simply because we're talking about web accessibility. So I'm going to go to Insert Image. I'm going to go to my tech folder and my images folder, and notice that I saved it with no spaces, no capitalization, and you can look down here and you can make things smaller. So maybe I want to try 250, and I'm going to click on that once more, and I'm going to make sure I have alt text. So down here. So now when it comes to alignment, that's when you start getting into CSS. And so that's when I could specifically create a class for this specific image, or if I only have one image, maybe I just use one image in that case. And so for now, let's leave that as is. Let's save all and let's start adding styles, and then we'll revisit that. Okay, so I'm going to create a CSS file. I'm going to go File, New. Doing this a little different than we did it in the last one. We're not using the CSS designer to do this, and I'm going to name this, save it as accessibility.css. So I got to have that .css. I want to do it in my styles folder, so make sure it's there. I'm going to save it, and then over here I can see it. And so I like to just double check things as I go to make sure I'm doing that correctly. Now I'm going to close this, and now I need to attach it. So I'm going to go to Tools, CSS. I'm going to attach the CSS. Go to Browse. Hit OK. So then I should see it up here, and then when I click on this, I should see it. And if for some reason I'm getting an error, I need to kind of retrace my steps and figure out where that problem happened. And so in this case, I'm going to add a background color. And so I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to start with my container. And so I might go container, and if you remember, I could go over here to my CSS designer. Make sure that's selected. I'm not going to use media. This is more when you're doing different things from mobile devices. I'm going to hit plus sign. I'm going to go down here. I'm going to go background. Use my color picker, and let's try that once more. And so I also want to do my body tag. So maybe I'm gonna hand code this. So you'll notice that Dreamweaver always tries to help you. And then I can go color picker here. Go like that. So now you'll notice that this container actually has a border around it. And so this is something, rather than work with the CSS designer, I could just say border. And so I could do this where I could do a border bottom, top, etc., or I can just do the shortcut. So I'm going to go 1 pixel. I'm going to go color. And this is where I could use my color picker if I wanted to, or in this case, you can always look here, and let's see how I did it. All right, so I go down my container, and I'm looking more for the color that I used, or if you know your color. And you'll notice that here it's doing double. So there's other ways to kind of do this, but I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do solid. And you got to make sure that you have that closing semicolon. Okay. And so this is where I can save all and preview and see what it looks like. It's not quite as thick as the example. Also, there's some padding issues and other things. So if I go over here, so this is for the container, and so I'm going to just hand code this example. I'm going to go width, and I'm going to say 1000 pixels, and I'm going to say padding 10 pixels. And if I wanted to make this border a little bigger, I might just change it to 2 pixels. And you can add drop shadows. I mean, there's other things you can do, but often keeping it simple is better. So I'm going to preview it. So one of the things I'll notice with the examples, the example centered. This one's a little wider, so it looks like I just went possibly maybe that previous version could have been 800. To basically center that div, my container, this is where I'd say padding left, auto. Sometimes make those mistakes. I actually meant margin left, auto. And you can already see in the preview how it's doing it right. And this is why, to me, I like to save preview along the way, because I can start to see are things working the way I want them to. And one of the things that I'm noticing is this image actually is not transparent the way that usually that little gray and white checkbox background suggests it is. So this is something that would need to be fixed and changed and replaced. But we're going to move on and deal with that at the very end. So if I look at this example, we're going to focus on our headings. And this is something I could easily do right here by doing an H1 curly brace, and so color, I do that hashtag or that pound sign, allows me to come over, and I gotta have that closing. So that's an easy way to do, but I can also then do it with the CSS designer. So I'm gonna take this H2 and I'm going to go down here, click H2, and you can see it didn't get the right one, so I'm going to correct it. I'm going to go down here, and when I go to text, I want to make this color white. So I'm going to go up there, but I want to add a background color to this heading. So this is where I'm going to go over here, and you can start to see that take place. Now, in this example, I can look at the font family I used. It looks like I'm just using this kind of Arial at the body level. So, and you can see, and the way these work is, it's going to use Arial if the computer has that. If it doesn't, it's then going to look for Helvetica. If it doesn't have that, then it's going to look for basically a basic sans serif. And so that's why the font families have more. Now, there are web-safe fonts or things that are more likely for a computer to have, but it's often helpful just to use something very basic. Now, looking over here, I can already see this body tag. I did an error where I didn't have the semicolon, so I'm surprised I'm not seeing that red warning sign for a possible error. So I'm just going to paste that font family in, and that's looking pretty good. But I might also go over here, go back to this body, and I might say line height, and I might say 1.5. And you start to figure out what you like. For, it might be that 1.5 is too big. So I'm going to do save all. Let's get rid of some of these. Okay, so we can start looking at this, and I can preview it once more. And I'm not trying to do it exactly like that page, but when I look at this, I can see that, all right, the font size is a little big for me. I think this one's a little smaller, and so that's something that you could always, at the body tag, right? So you can go over here and font size, and maybe I want the font to be 15 pixels. And I could play with that to see what is that kind of sweet spot for me. You always want to think about your users, their vision, especially when it comes to web accessibility. You don't want the font size really small where people are struggling to read your content or having to use other tools to improve the readability. You want to try to plan for them and help them be successful. So it might be this H1 that I want to actually make that bigger. So that might be where I want to, let's see what that looks like. They're looking pretty good. Some things I notice is could use some definitely white space there. So let's go down here, and so that is my H2, and that might be where I do padding left 5 pixels. And you can see what that looks like. I might then say padding top 2 pixels, padding bottom 2 pixels. And so that kind of improves that white space and that readability. So that looks pretty good. So in this case, let's take this image, and we're going to replace it in a minute, but let's just add some CSS here. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to make sure accessibility is selected. I'm going to hit plus. And so you can see it's being very specific. Well, I only have one image on this page, so I can just do that. And then I'm going to go down here and we're going to go look for positioning to float this. And so it's not going to quite do that. Where is it? This is where I'm just used to hand coding this stuff. There. Float. And you notice that pushed it off to the right. And then we're going to go down here to this footer text, and we will go back to the CSS designer just because I want you to be comfortable switching back and forth. We're going to say text align center. We're going to do text size or font size. We're going to do extra small. And that looks pretty good. So we might do the same thing here. We might highlight this. Once more, let's hit the plus sign and do it this way. And then I'm going to say text, and I'm going to make that font size small. Now notice it didn't do anything because I now have to add that class. And you can see, well, it's not quite what I want. So you can see that if I change it, that looks like that. I'm going to save all, and I'm going to preview, and we're just about there. I'm going to switch that image, and we're going to check what the WebAIM to see that the accessibility checker gives us thumbs up, and we're also going to check the validation. But let's go back to Google Images before we wrap this up. You can see once again I can't seem to spell, and we could even say WebAIM because that's exactly what we're looking for. And so let's open image in new, and let's see if we can, save as, but I'm going to save it the exact same, but in this case I think this example is it's still a JPEG. So that's part of the problem, is I really need a PNG file to have that clear background. And when we're not getting anywhere we want, we're just going to try one more, and we're going to give up on that simply because of, and it's funny, then that ended up as a PNG file. Let's go back over here, let's go up, let's click on this, and we're going to actually replace it by using this folder and going to this. It's a lot bigger and it has that white background, but let's not fret about that. So this would be something that maybe I want to actually add a border along this to just add a little something, 1 pixel, solid, and maybe I want to use the same as the container. And you see what it did there. So I added a nice little border. I could add some padding around that. There's a few other things. I could also make that a link itself. And so I could click on that and add a URL to that if I wanted to under link. But I think we're pretty good there. Let's save all. Let's click on source code. Let's check the validation in Dreamweaver. It says we're good. So we're going to upload this and then check it online. So one thing I forgot, I think in a previous video, is that I had already had an edtech 502 site for these examples. So rather than necessarily putting it on my own personal one, so I can go here and I should find that it replaced it with my current one. You notice I got wider. It also has this image, and specifically here you can see that, wow, that's kind of close there. So that could be something that I do after the fact. Want to go down and click on this image, and or go to my CSS and go to my image tag, and maybe I do padding or margin 5 pixels. And that gives that a little more. If I find that it's like, no, let's go bigger. And that forced that extra white space that I was looking for. So I'm going to save all, I'm going to re-upload, and then we're going to check. And so every time you make a little change like that, you could find that it's going to give you a validation error. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go to HTML, check that. Says I'm good. I'm going to go to CSS. Check that. Says I'm good. And so then I'm going to go WebAIM. And there's a few accessibility checkers out there. So but this one I go here and I check. And so it's a lot of times it's not necessarily that it's right or wrong with these accessibility checkers, but it will give you things that you might think that you want to focus on. And a couple of the big things I always look for: one, is it giving me an error? And two, contrast. So it will look at color contrast, and so it's important to do this. And so then you can share these links when you submit your assignment, so we can, or I can, check it when I grade it. But just like that, we created the Web Accessibility's resource page. Let me know if you have questions. Thanks.